under generalizations. Generalizations from class-based representations depend on the possibility of demonstrating specific properties within the instance of X. Right? Think about that. It depends on generalizations from class-based representations themselves depend on the possibility of demonstrating specific properties, right? Specific nuanced properties within the instance of X that in here, they have to reside within X, right? Necessarily, within all instances of the occurrences of X. That's sort of a mouthful. But we have to think of it like this, right? If I say that I am trying to assess a relationship, and this is going to be super conceptual, don't get into set theory or anything. Just think generally. If I say that there is an inherent necessary relationship, this is a big if, right? There is an inherent necessary relationship insofar as any time A occurs, B is a subset of A. Let's just say for whatever social scientific theory that you're developing or analyzing, the facts of the matter say that anytime we see the occurrence of A, there is always the occurrence of B as a subset. So anytime I didn't prepare conceptually enough for this level of complexity, but I'm just throwing this out there. This example might be good or not. Anytime we talk about symbiotic relationships in hard science, then as a subset of symbiotic relationships has to be a very nuanced discourse between sort of host, I don't want to say parasite, but host and organism, like a relationship between host and organism, I guess. I'm a little rusty on my science, right? I used to know this stuff really, really well. But the idea is, right, you can't talk about symbiosis without recognizing the relationship between two different organisms. Or you can't talk about parasitism, which would probably be easier, right? You can't talk about parasitism as a discourse, as a general discourse, parasitism as such, and I'm sure there's thick, fat books written on this, without recognizing that parasitism requires, I would imagine, by definition, a discourse on host-parasite relationship, various hosts, various parasites, right? So to talk about parasitism means that you are necessarily also going to talk about host-parasite. But we recognize that the relationship between the host, independent, and the parasite, independent, it has really no meaning within the larger context of in the larger context of parasitism, without recognizing that this aspect, and this is just an example, it might not be the best example, it's the first thing off the top of mind, it's the first thing in the morning, but you recognize to talk about A requires us to recognize that A, the definition, the understanding of A, requires an understanding of some smaller set within A, right? So the idea is, if we are talking about this relationship, then to try and talk about A without the occurrence of this is to fail to recognize that this is what makes it unique, right? This is the UNIQUE. This is the unique property that we've been talking about, right? You can call it whatever you want. There is something in the discourse of parasitism that makes the host-parasite relationship unique. It makes the host-parasite relationship unique and distinct from talking about giving someone a piggyback ride, right? It's two people, but it's not the same. It also makes it different than talking about holding someone's hand while you walk down the road, right? There's two people, there's a relationship, but it's different, right? It's also different than talking about a mutually beneficial relationship where I'm benefiting from this organism living within my body, and the organism is benefiting from living within my body. That's different, right? So the idea is we need to, and my example might be bad, but the concept should be clear, I hope. We need to identify, right? This is what the epistemologist wants to do, right? We strive to ID this. Right? The epistemologist, we strive to identify this. We want to identify that unique property, that unique characteristic that identifies the class as such if possible. And there might be more than one, there might be several, right? But what we want to do is identify, just like the legal theorist identifies the very particular instances of relationships or what have you in the case that makes it precedent, that serves as precedence, we as epistemologists, we as social scientists more generally, want to be able, in doing our research and conceptualizing and writing our papers and defending our dissertations, blah, 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 we want to be able to train our minds to be the type of mind that can effectively identify uniqueness within the world. That's a very unique occurrence of something. That's different. There's something about that's different. And now that I know that there's something unique about that, I need to understand how it functions. Right? How does it do what it does? What's the relationship that it has? What are the parts that it has? What's the, If you can get to that level, then you're going to be awesome, and I will have succeeded in my job. All right, last key point on the bottom of page 7, and this is actually taking me a lot longer than I thought it would. Last key point on the bottom of page 7, explaining how something is nevertheless possible despite what looks like an obstacle. This is a direct quote, right? Explaining how something is nevertheless possible despite what looks like an obstacle, right? So now we're in a different case, so I'll erase this. I'm attempting to talk about the possible existence or the possible occurrence of something, despite the fact that articulating its possibility is difficult for any number of things. For a perfect example might be extraterrestrial life. Right? Extraterrestrial life is certainly possible. There's nothing even remotely contradictory about the existence of extraterrestrial life. It's probably likely that there's extraterrestrial life, but despite the possibility, we recognize that there are obstacles in the way. It requires more than showing merely that there is no impossibility involved in the thing. Right? You can't say, well, it's impossible. Think about how logical this is, right? You can't say there is no impossibility in the occurrence of extraterrestrial life, therefore extraterrestrial life exists. That's false. That's categorically false, right? You can't, and people do this all the time. I'm going to give you an example, probably in the next section. I'm probably going to have to break this up into 2 sections. But the idea is, you can't say, it's a fallacious argument, right? It's a horribly fallacious argument, and people usually don't present arguments as obviously fallacious as I'm presenting now. I'm sort of dramatizing the point so that I can, make the point to serve pedagogical, to serve my pedagogical purposes. But the idea is, you cannot in any sense say that the occurrence of X is not impossible, and that be true. Okay, so the occurrence of X is not impossible. The occurrence of aliens is in no sense impossible. It's completely possible. Therefore, aliens exist. No, not quite. That's not how that works. For many, many reasons, of which I'll get into later. So, top of page 8 then. The mere possibility of a state of affairs, right, which is important, right? The mere possibility, the fact that this thing could exist as a state of affairs, is not enough of a requirement of an epistemological or logical, and there's actually rather rigorous mathematical proof that's required, axiomatic proof that's required. I touched on this a little bit in some of my epistemic modal stuff and my modal stuff, but I might possibly entertain doing a little bit more dense. Actually, I don't know if I'm going to do any. I've done a ton of logic. I might. But anyway, the mere possibility of a state of affairs is not enough to settle the question of how, right? The question of how our knowledge of the world is possible, right? You can't talk about, and it's not even talking about, it's a conceptual leap to go from possibility to existence. You can't just make the claim that because it's possible, it therefore exists. That's fallacious. What you can do is say, it's possible, here are the conditions with which it might exist, and try to satisfy those conditions, right? This is why engineers and scientists are leaps and bounds ahead of most everyone else, is because they, I don't know this for certain, but I would imagine the best of them are motivated by looking at the possibility of X, whatever X might be, and then doing exactly what I'm telling you to do right now, conceptualizing the necessary conditions that need to be satisfied in order to manifest and bring about X. X is not impossible. X is totally possible, yet I don't see an occurrence of X around